Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of CNF Talks. I'm delighted to have with me today Andrew Tuson, who's a partner at BCLP. Andrew is going to be speaking at our Financial Services Investigations and Enforcement Summit, which is being held at America Square Conference Centre in London on the 26th of June. Andrew, welcome.
Thanks, Maurice. Good to see you.
Good to have you with us. Let's turn to our first question. You're moderating the panel discussion on the impact of the FCA's proposals to publicise the launch of an investigation and name the firm involved. If the FCA go ahead with these proposals, what advice would you give to firms facing an investigation? And if they don't go ahead with it, what advice would you give then?
Yeah, thanks, Maurice. So obviously these changes which the FCA are considering have received a lot of scrutiny in recent weeks, and at the moment they're considering consultation responses. Clearly, if the FCA proceeds and if it determines that it's in the public interest, which it itself will decide, to publicise the name of a firm being investigated by the FCA, then we would be concerned that there could be significant damage which is caused to that firm. Now, the impact will clearly vary depending on the type of firm under investigation, but you can see that if you are a smaller firm which is under investigation, that actually there could be a very significant impact where the market might have lots of different options as to who it deals with. And if, for example, you're under a live investigation for a financial crime issue, let's say money laundering systems and controls or market abuse systems and controls, there could be quite a serious impact for that firm if it says to the market, well, hi everyone, I've got a live money laundering investigation, don't quite know the scale of it or the size of it, and that's quite a damaging thing. What does that say to customers, consumers of that firm? Does it say that actually might as well deal with somebody else? Probably yes. Does it mean that for shareholders in that entity, if it's a listed entity, they might think, okay, well, I might pull my investment, move somewhere else? Would there be a share price impact as well as a reputational impact on the firm? And so those will be real live issues, and we see regularly when we're acting for firms and they are putting out market announcements at the conclusion of an FCA investigation. A lot of work will go into positioning to the market what it means to have a fine, e.g. for an AML issue. And a lot of firms will emphasize that these issues relate to things which happened a very long time ago, where there was a different management in place, where there was a different regime in place, and the issues that the FCA would have been investigating have been fully remediated. So it's quite a different thing to say that a firm is under a live investigation, and particularly when around 70% of investigations that the FCA open don't actually end up with an outcome, you might think a lot of noise that this will create will be unnecessary because it won't actually end up with there in fact being a finding against them. Clearly, if the FCA don't proceed with this change, which we think would be the better scenario market, then there will still be the risk, as exists now, for investigations to be announced. But the FCA currently, and we consider this is the correct position, although clearly it's for the FCA to determine this, to announce only in extreme scenarios, in extreme circumstances. And normally they make those sorts of announcements where they're trying to calm the market, to effectively say, yes, we're aware of this particular issue and we're looking into this particular issue. And we think, that is sensible and kind of pragmatic, but it's not there effectively for the FCA first to bring an issue to the attention of the market. It's more there to reassure the market. So hopefully that position would prevail. But it's important that the market does engage and makes it clear to the FCA, because now is the time to, for financial services firms to make their voice heard.
Yes, well, I'm sure that they are. It'd be interesting to know how many people have responded. Turning to the position where there is an investigation underway, what are the main benefits and risks of being completely candid with the regulator in an investigation? And how can you mitigate the risk of information getting into the public domain and being used in subsequent private litigation?
Yes, so as we all know, authorised firms have obligations to be open and cooperative with the regulator. Those obligations under Principle 11 formally, and firms will always want to be open and candid with the regulator. But we would be concerned that where there's a risk of an investigation opening up and then the investigation becoming public, if the FCA considers public interest for that to happen at an early stage, that might change the nature of the openness which exists between firms and regulators, where there are more borderline issues over whether or not an issue should be reported into the regulator. So right now it might be the case that firms are very open with the regulator and say, we've just come across this particular issue, we don't yet know what the issue means, but we're looking into it and we'll update you and let you know when we find out more about the particular issue. But if firms become more concerned, that in turn might lead to an enforcement investigation being opened up, which could then become public. It might be that firms are more sensitive about whether or not they should be informing an FCA of an issue when they're not really sure about the scope of it, what it might mean, what it doesn't mean, and they might want to look into it a little bit more before they make that report into the regulator, so that they can give some comfort and reassurance to the regulator if that turns out to be the case. I think inevitably it will change, or is likely to change, the way in which firms interact and report issues where they're not really sure about what those issues might mean right now. And so I think that concern that actually the level of openness isn't actually supported and encouraged by these new proposals if they do come into effect. With regard to litigation risk, clearly there are a bunch of funders out there looking to bring actions against listed entities and to create shareholder group actions. And one could see that there might be an increase in shareholders being encouraged to look at bringing claims, in particular under Section 90A of FSMA, where claims can be, where it's alleged that disclosure was delayed, where those shareholders might not need to show that they relied on any information being published in order to bring those claims, but where effectively it could be said that actually the announcement of an investigation should have taken place much earlier, and or where information hasn't been announced, you could see that shareholders try to look to bring actions against listed entities. So there could be a real impact in the litigation space on firms because of these changes.
So very real risks there. And the FCA's proposals are designed to make the process more transparent and demonstrate to the market that they are taking action when required. Both the FCA and the PRA are keen to streamline the investigations process. Do you think that their proposals will achieve this? And what would make life easier for firms on the receiving end of an investigation?
I can't see that these changes are going to streamline a process. I mean, you see that if enforcement are seeing new market typologies, new issues emerging that they're concerned about. So let's say, if these proposals are in place when the LIBOR FX issues were continuing, they might want to put information out into the market to let the market know of new typologies. Or if they're seeing, for example, a new fraud trend, like a new push payment fraud trend, market, then of course, understanding and hearing about that in real time rather than years later would be, you could see, of market value. But the FCA could publish that information, we would say, anonymously without needing to give the name of a firm, and that might have more impact in terms of bringing information out into the market as quickly as possible. But actually kind of naming firms probably would lead to, well, I might think more of a slowness actually in investigations, when you might need to think more around third parties who could be identified with regard to these announcements, the impact on them, impact on fairness. Should individual representations and or individual impact need to be taken into account, as already happens with regard to warning notices that the FCA is going to issue? And I think a lot of times, the FCA will say, well, we're not looking to make announcements on individuals. And that's all well and good, but particularly for smaller firms, where you're looking at an issue, it will be well known to the market who, the boards of directors are of those entities, or who's doing market abuse surveillance, who's responsible for market abuse surveillance in a smaller firm, or even in a larger firm as well. So there will be impacts on those individuals, both in terms of, if they're, for example, moving firms, what might it mean if there's a live investigation that it's announced? And similarly, you might see that actually where the FCA has made an announcement of an investigation, then you might see that actually the firm needs to respond to that and give kind of market, information and updates on those sorts of investigations. So I think actually you could see that investigations become more complex with more issues needing to be taken into account, and the impact of individuals more. And I think if you want to kind of speed up and make investigations more transparent, I'm not sure why announcing is going to be speeding up an investigation. That doesn't seem to kind of. So I think if you actually want to deliver investigations more quickly, then I'm not sure that this is a tool to do that.
Well, it's certainly a fascinating development in this area, isn't it? And we'll have to see how everything evolves. But for now, we've reached our time limit, Andrew. Thank you so much for being with us today. And for our viewers, very much hope you'll be able to join us in person at the summit in London on the 26th of June. More information available on the City and Financial Global website. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Maurice, and look forward to the discussion.
Very good.